What's going on, beat making people? Let's get straight into this. This is the oscillator section. That's what OSC stands for. This little button here turns it on and off, each oscillator. You got 3 of them. You've got these parameters here. This one is your wavetable position. If you click up here, you can select different waveforms. I've selected a sine square. If I turn this rotary knob hard left, it's a sine wave. If I push it all the way right, it's 100% square wave. You can use the pitch to transpose the oscillator. If I click here, you can do sense as well. This intensity knob here is basically a filter if you have it on the spectrum mode. There's 3 modes basically. If you go to bend mode, it does, has a different effect, which I guess is just sort of morphing the wave. And then formant is obviously, if you know about sort of talk boxes and all that. The amp is the volume. So basically you have 2 filters. Using this slider here, you can send this oscillator filter 1, pull it down, send it to filter 2. So on the filter, the cutoff point is the frequency that is used to apply the filter from. The resonance is the boost that occurs at the cutoff point. This is not applicable on all of them. Sometimes it does come into play. For instance, if I use this, the slider next to each filter is the volume for that filter. The mix 1 and 2 determines the balance between the filters. As you can see, the mix is all the way to 1. Now it's in the middle. The filter can be set to serial, which means the signal comes out of the oscillator and then goes into filter 1, then into filter 2. If you were to set the oscillator to filter 2, then that would bypass the filter section if it was in serial mode. Parallel mode means the oscillator runs through both filters at the same time. The blue and green tabs allow you to modulate using envelopes and low frequency oscillators. The 4th one is the one that usually controls the amplifier. You can use that to alter the attack, decay, sustain and the release of the sound. Attack is how quickly the sound kicks in. Level kind of curves your attack. Decay is how quickly the sound falls off. Sustain loop determines the nature of how the sound is sustained once it decays. So it decays all the way to there, then this sustain loop here, as you can see. Yeah, so the morph knob basically relates to these 2 boxes, I believe. Yes, it does. If it's a short release, once you let go, it's going to stop. If it's a long release, once I let go, it still rings out for a period of time. You can use any of these to modulate another parameter by clicking this little box and dragging it to an assignable control. And once you've put it in the box, click and hold, and let's drag on your mouse. Now that's going to set the minimum and the maximum value. You can invert it as well. That's being modulated by this envelope. LFO stands for low frequency oscillation or low frequency oscillator. You have the option of blending between 2 waveforms, and you can select, basic types here and your curve types in this list here. Again, you modulate just by simply just dragging into one of these 3 spaces. Once you drop it into the box, just click, hold and drag to adjust your range. Basically with the LFO, it's going to bounce between your range, whether that be wide or narrow. The rate on the LFO section allows you to control the speed of modulation. You can set values musically relative to the tempo using the sync button. The amp lets you affect the strength of the modulation, and obviously these boxes indicate that I could modulate these with another modulator, such as LFO or envelope. This restart button tells the modulation cycle to stop when you let go of a key, and then it restarts once you push another key. LFOs also have their own internal envelope that you can use to modulate, so you can play with that if you wanna. Attack just means that it's not gonna kick in straight away. If you use this little drop down menu here on the LFO section, you can change it to a performer or stepper. Now, performer uses a sequencer that can be fed with different curve types to modulate another parameter. I'll use pitch as it's quite an obvious effect. If you notice, the performer is running through the sequence. You can control the length of this sequence by deselecting the numbered boxes. So you have to click the box that you want to be the last one, essentially. You can also determine where the starting point of the sequence is by dragging this arrow. You can see it always starts from there. It's crossfade. That's basically crossfading between these curve types and these curve types, your rate. These two rows of buttons relate to these two rows of curves here. So as you can see, I've switched off alternate steps in the sequence. You can also alter these curves by loading a curve. So click on the curve you want. This stepper also uses a sequence to program values that are in turn used to modulate another parameter. You can fine tune or snap to round numbers. Basically, I'm holding one key at the moment, and as you can see, it's going through the sequence and modulating the pitch based off these values here. You can also glide. But you can see it's kind of blending between the notes. You can actually randomize as well. So onto these tabs, OSC obviously relates to your oscillators. The pitch bend controls how many semitones your pitch bend wheel will bend the sound up or down. That's 2. The glide knob affects how long it takes to blend from one note to another, depending on your voicing. Select a monophonic option. The oscillator phases function, well, this allows you to nudge the oscillation phase position. For example, if I have 2 identical waveforms and one of them is shifted 180 degrees out of phase, nothing is being heard because they cancel each other. As you can see, I'm pushing the key right now. I hope that makes sense. But if you're new to this kind of stuff and you don't understand, just basically play around with it until it sounds nice. If it don't sound nice, then switch it off. You get me? Robert's your auntie's husband. To be fair though, if you don't know, just keep watching my videos and I'm sure at some point you will find out most things. You can adjust vibrato speed and the depth using these. Okay, that's quite irritating, so I'm going to stop doing that. Keyboard tracking basically relates to your key tracking of your oscillator. By default, and in most people's case, you're going to want a linear key track. That is to say that as you ascend up the keyboard, the pitch also increases. Now you can disable that if you just click off. So as you can see, I'm going up the keyboard and it's still playing the same note. Obviously, if you're combining different oscillators, there might come a time where you want to sort of use one oscillator as a harmonic for another, just to create, I don't know, some grit or some sub or whatever the reason is. If I give you an example, I've got one oscillator linear, the second oscillator is off. The second oscillator is just doing that. the first oscillator together. Now, as you probably have guessed based off what we just spoke about, your keyboard tracking filter allows you to adjust the graph to select how the notes are being affected by each filter. If I flip this, for instance, this little box here represents your maximum polyphony, which is how many notes can play at once. Polyphonic, obviously, I've just explained that. Monophonic is the second box, which basically means only one note can play at any given time. This sort of blends the two notes together based on your glide time, as we discussed before. Mono rotate is like monophonic, but it fades the outgoing note quickly. Well, at least that's what the manual says anyway. Me, personally, I don't know. You have this trigger section here, which has always, legato, and triller. Triller is basically how an Irish person talks about the highest grossing album of all times. Now, I'm just playing. Triller is a type of monophonic function that allows you to go back and forth between two notes as long as you keep holding one of them down. It makes you do a trill. Isn't that so ingenious? Legato is different, as even if you're still holding one note down, once you transition from one note to the other, that's it. You're done, son. Always is different in that each note is always fully re-triggered. These rules apply regardless of how much glide you have on. Unison, or unisono as it actually says here, allows you to add in more voices. So as you can see, the sound instantly becomes a lot thicker. Unison spread, if I turn this on, it basically plays copies at different pitches, which will be detuned equally between the defined range, which is here to there. By the way, if you double click on anything in this plugin, it goes back to the default value. Now, the more you push the slider towards the upper end, the more detuning is happening up to that maximum. If I change the mode from centered to chord, the original note is not detuned. It uses the unison copies to create octaves based on intervals of the minimum and maximum values. I hope that makes sense. So if I was to have an octave, for instance, you could modulate this as the box indicates. So, knock yourself out, go crazy. Wavetable position, which is this one here, is what it sounds like. It basically deviates the wavetable starting position. Pan position basically spreads the sound across the stereo field. So central basically is mono, as it actually says. Let me just turn that down, it's a bit loud. Sorry if I'm blasting your ears. So yeah, the routing section allows you to change the position of routable parameters such as the feedback by clicking on it to highlight it. Bypass also by using, these. The global section, it affects the entire instance of the plugin. Most of the things are fairly self-explanatory. If I click these different parameters, choose to randomize them. These boxes here indicate the amount of randomization that is taking place, so you can actually technically switch off one of them if you didn't want one of them to be randomized. Basically, this is the modulation oscillator. You just click which oscillator you want to be affected. You can adjust the pitch, octave that. Noise, and I'm going to take that off, right click, off. So if you turn up your amp on your noise and it's switched on, color is basically a filter. Feedback adds feedback into the signal. Inserts, just like feedback, you can insert your inserts into various positions in the signal chain. As it says here, this section in the bottom right is the macro control. The 4 squares on the left allow you to use specific types of data to automate other parameters. These are key tracking, signal based on the pitch of the MIDI note played, velocity, which uses the velocity data from your MIDI keyboard, AT, which uses aftertouch data if your MIDI keyboard has an aftertouch function. Then there's a trigger random, which is a random value with each MIDI note, essentially. You can pretty much assign these to any single thing, and you can actually assign them to external hardware. You know, you have like knobs and sliders on your keyboard, for instance. If I drop it into the box that says SC underneath, which means sidechain, if you click on the arrow once, if I click beneath the square again, that is inverted, so now I have to turn the macro knob anti-clockwise to get the same effect. And if I click it once more, it goes back to a dash, completely bypassed. I don't know if you'll ever use that, but yeah, now you know. The effects section is basically self-explanatory, so I'm not really going to go into that. You can just click here and select various effects. You should now have enough knowledge to basically know what you're doing. Hopefully you have a newfound respect for the people that put these patches together. So anyway, that's it. I'm done. 1.